Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, a few days ago I released a video talking about the crisis that is plaguing Destiny. Today I wanted to talk about, well, this. Of course, this is not only the 10th anniversary of Destiny's release, but also this is the release of the new update to what Destiny is calling Codename Frontiers. This features, apparently, 2 new expansions, a change to the definition of expansions, and a whole load of different changes to the way that content is delivered to us. The short version of everything is that we should be looking to expect some attempts at changing up Destiny's content formula. I don't want to go ahead and talk about some of the other stuff that's on Bungie's blog right now. The portal, all of the changes coming up to gear and challenge and all of that stuff that you can hear from Datto. You can hear about it from Fallout. You can hear about it from a bunch of other people. However, today I did want to focus on the narrative and everything that's going forward, because one of the big problems that I highlighted in my video a few days ago is the fact that for Destiny it feels like we have run out of road. There are definitely going to be moments in the future where that is still a persistent feeling, but at very least today we have a shape to Frontiers, and that's actually relatively important. It means we get the ability to sit there and say, okay, we can expect this in the future. There is still a reason to invest our time in this game. And that, ultimately, is what people are still looking for. I think we should then go ahead and jump down towards what is basically the most important part of it for me, which is just the note that this is going to be the beginning of a new saga, a new multi-year saga, for that matter. This is a point picked up on by Alison Lurs, the narrative director at Bungie for Destiny 2, and yeah, let's just go ahead and read through this. We're proud of the final shape and the ending we created for the Light and Darkness saga, and we knew that the episodes that follow would act as an epilogue tying up Light and Dark's hanging threads, but also setting us up for what's next. The episodes close doors and open new ones, purposeful ones, storylines that are set in place to prepare us for what comes next. And what is next is our new saga. Just for context, and so people can see, there are a few images here that have been linked. I have no clue where half of these places are. No clue what any of this is, in fact. Normally I'm able to give you some kind of lore analysis for things, but ultimately, I'm mostly fresh out of luck on these ones. This could be anywhere. The sort of escaping structures here implies maybe that we're looking at some kind of smaller superstructure generally, but still, I have no clue. These keep appearing everywhere. Maybe they're some kind of colonization and habitation pod, but who knows? Right now, I'm taking a stab at things, and yeah, not a clue. That being said, let's keep reading. You'll see teases of it in the later 2 episodes, and then fully kick off with codename Apollo. The next saga is also based around a core theme, much like Light and Darkness did. It will introduce plenty of new characters, factions, twists, and more. There's a lot more here we will say eventually, but we don't want to spoil the journey for you. This will be a multi-year journey, one we can't wait to take you on. Our first expansion, codename Apollo, is a non-linear, character-driven adventure. We'll talk more about this when the time comes, because, yeah, ultimately that's going to be something that is an important detail to think on, but when I hear, I'm not the only one for this, when I hear non-linear character-driven adventure, I actually think about one of the initial pitches for the way that the campaign for Destiny 1 Vanilla was meant to work. The problem, of course, with that was that it was rewritten within the space of, like a year, and then they had to ask for multiple delays just so they could make something because they trashed the original campaign. For good or for ill, it's something that happened. So, yeah, this is, I think, one of those moments at which that concept maybe gets revisited and we get to see what it might actually be worth. Because I think the important point about that is we don't know if that campaign concept truly worked, because Destiny 1 Vanilla was, well, dare I play the Exo Stranger clip again? It was Destiny 1 Vanilla. It was terrible. So ultimately, maybe there's another chance for them to take a stab at this. Bungie is just better at writing characters now than they were back then, but also I think it's fair to say that that's partly because of the fact that hopefully in the making of Apollo they are under a little bit less duress. I don't know that to be the case, of course, we have no clue, but at very least the vibe from developers I've been hearing stuff from in the studio is excited, so I have to hope that that's the case. Anyway, let's keep reading. What do we mean by Codename Apollo is non-linear? Previously, in stories like The Final Shape, you experienced the story as A to B to C to D in a nice straight line. In Codename Apollo, our story takes place over dozens of threads you'll explore and discover. So when you land on our brand new location, the story starts at A, and then you can choose if you want to explore C first, or try to get into B, or maybe investigate D. And the options you didn't choose? Don't worry, those other options are still open for you to go back and play through. You'll need to. Because the more you play and discover, the more the story progresses, so experiencing a certain number of threads opens up the next part of the story. The order in which you explore will be something you choose, but we have built Codename Apollo in a way that the story always makes sense and flows from beginning to middle to end. So there's no time gating, no waiting for the next drop. Codename Apollo's story unfolds based on player progression. Destiny is at its best when it's mysterious, weird, and not afraid to try new things. This shift to non-linear stories isn't something we're locking ourselves into, but it is the structure that fits Codename Apollo best. The narrative structure of the releases that follow will be quite different, a structure that suits that game's experience. And we want to continue to innovate with each expansion across both gameplay and narrative. So the whole thing they've just been mentioning there with narrative structure, yeah, I hope that this would be the kind of take that they would go with. Not necessarily that they would always be mixing up the narrative structure of each expansion, but more so the idea that it should fit the expansion and what it's going for. Maybe sometimes that means we return to a linear campaign, maybe it's something completely different entirely. I don't know. The point is that as we keep pushing through all of this, we will see more changes, and I hope that the experimentation bears fruit. The general vibe of what they're putting out here tells us a lot about the idea that they're willing to go ahead and make stumbles in front of us as long as they communicate those properly to us. They want to try on the communication front. And that's good, but also ultimately it tells us that, well, there's another half to this which we're going to talk about at the very end, which is more about the general reception of the player base, more entirely. Into the unknown. This all sounds like a big change, and it is. Because when the rhythm of our story becomes predictable, or when characters and our world fail to change, that's how we create a situation, not a story. So how can we innovate? By telling a story that keeps up with our innovation, not one that slows it down. That means an evolving world, giving space for new characters, growing and evolving factions, making sure the story we tell is in a world we have nurtured, and with characters who grow in turn. We believe in rewarding the player for paying attention without punishing someone for not knowing something. That way, everyone gets to come along for the ride no matter how deep in the lore you are. You'll see that approach starting with episodes and continuing into the new multi-year story. So when we think about a multi-year arc, what does that look like? Think of it as a constellation of stories united by a single theme. We will show you what that theme is later, but suffice to say, we believe in it. Think of this multi-year arc as a web, not a line. Each release fits into a larger saga. We can't wait to take you on that journey. Story is easy to spoil, so I won't ruin the details for what the theme in Codename Apollo is or what it's about, but I will give you something to look forward to. Apollo ends with the narrative gasoline that will propel us into the next few years with a clear theme, goal, and a destination that won't come at you as a straight line, but will be well worth the trip. It'll reward you, it'll surprise you, and it'll take us to places Destiny has never seen before. See you when the time is right. So, there's a few notes here that can be made, and I'll touch on this again near the end, but it's nice to see the note that they have in one of these middle paragraphs talking about how the story needs to be approachable, how you need to be able to jump in and talk about this and experience it, whether you are a deep lore nerd like myself or whether you're someone who is just jumping in with the story. For the longest time, people have sat there and said, I don't care about this. And you know what? I think that there are a few different reasons for that. It's partly because there's no potential future in the game. It's partly because people don't see a threat. And there is just a general degree to which some people aren't here for the story, and that's fine. But with regards to those other things, there is also the point to be made that some people don't care about the story because they don't understand the repercussions, because it's kind of impenetrable. Bungie has long had this problem, so I don't know what the exact approach is meant to be, but at very least this is a focus for them. How they do that, I don't know, but it's always going to be a tricky one, and they're always going to have to consistently gauge where they're at with this, because sometimes they'll get it right and sometimes they'll get it wrong. Trust me when I say that as someone who is really deep in this, it's very easy to get your linear, narrow focus in on one particular objective and forget that people need to understand why you're there. And that's not me saying the narrative team will do this, I'm just saying it takes a lot of cognizance to keep in mind the broader picture, which is what they're saying they're trying to do. Then again, that could just also be a skill issue on my part. They may well be better storytellers than me, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Anyway, the blog ends with that, we come to a close. Well, a new beginning, really. Over the next few months, we'll be dishing out more deep dives and engaging in more conversation. We have no doubts the above breakdown of Codename Frontiers' plans will spawn far more questions than we can answer, but we'll be looking to keep you up to date as we take flight. Keep an eye on the deep dive section, as we'll be adding links to further topics. Thank you again for joining us on the first 10-year journey in Destiny. We've been through so much, battling the darkness and stopping the Witness. Now it's time to look to the stars again. It's time to imagine, to dream big and explore what our future can be within this universe. We have our heading and hope to see you join us along the way. The Destiny 2 dev team. So, there's a big point that I want to get to with all of this, but I think there is a bigger point to take away from a whole bunch of it, which is simply this. There is a lot that's been said here, and a lot of it is indeed correct. They're saying a lot of good stuff, particularly with the ideas of how they're still delivering content and the idea that they're still giving people stuff to invest into. But there is also a point at which a blog post is not necessarily going to do everything for everyone, right? So, what do I mean by that? Well, the initial reactions that I saw to all of this on Twitter was simply a lot of cautious optimism, but also there's some people who are just downright disinterested. I think a lot of people need more action, less words, and that's not an easy position for Bungie to be in, because right now they're in the process of finishing this stuff up and delivering it and making it. So ultimately it means that you're going to be sitting there waiting for all of this to drop whilst everything is going on in the background. There is no immediate fix to this problem in Destiny, and unfortunately it leaves Bungie in this very precarious position of having this long, hard road back to earning player trust. And for some players, the journey is just over, and they have accepted that, and they've made their peace with it. And they may only ever return to Destiny for a Destiny 3. And if that's the case, then so be it, because you know what? Yeah, they experienced a 10-year saga. They enjoyed their time, they got their money's worth, and that's a fair decision on their part. Bungie is going to have to entice them back into the game, and that is not going to be easy to do. For one, there is the point at which you provided players with a perfect jumping-off point. As wonderful as the swan song of the Final Shape was, it was still for many people a swan song, even though Destiny is not technically ending. I think also there is the important point to be made, which is simply that some people are still outraged. There are a lot of people who just won't play this game so long as Pete Parsons is the CEO. And that's really frustrating, because at the end of the day, that means the devs, through no fault of their own, have a much harder job. It means that the studio is going to occasionally have to rein in their ambitions when it comes to these new projects. And despite what the projection here is, that they want to try ambitious new things and they want to experiment with Destiny and do things that delight and surprise players, it's going to be harder to get all of that done. Because, well, there's just fewer of us. And this leads me to one of my two major points that I want to make here, which is this focus that they've had throughout all of this on the idea of making it so that the game is much more approachable, something which you can access and get into as a new player, something which you will need a little bit less knowledge about the lore to understand. All of that's important beyond the spectrum of what's already been touched on, because right now, I think universally we can all agree that one of the ways for Destiny to get out of its malaise at current is with new blood. There are no incentives for new players to jump in the same way that there would have been years ago. Yes, Destiny has a lot of content. Yes, there is a staggering amount of stuff you can do in the game. And yes, when you get into the experience, it's amazing. But there is no connective tissue between the start of your experience and what would be the best part of it in the end game. There is a need for a reapproach to all of the stuff to do with Into the Light and the new player content package that introduces people into the game. The tutorials are not good enough. It's not enough to sit there and have boxes of text pop up. You need an actual voiced tutorial, perhaps. You need more investment in that, and that's not always easy to justify, because, you know, ultimately, this is going to be something that leaves a lot of Destiny players in that weird space of like, well, this isn't content for me. I guess I'm just not worried about this, and I don't bother. But at the end of the day, Bungie may need to cut into some of that so that they can build those resources out, because it's now more important than ever. The vision that is required for the future of Destiny 2, ultimately it requires players, and that's the really big problem. If we don't have players, then, well, what's all this for? Nothing. And ultimately, that also leads me to my last and biggest point with all of this, which is simply, again, despite the fact that there is some cautious optimism within the community, despite the fact that this does give us what we need in terms of a multi-year journey being confirmed and with the first few steps of it being revealed to us, even if it's just in code names, I think it's also important for everyone to understand that other point, that again, some people are just gone. And it's not about the fact that there are people who are disgusted this time, it's based on another thing. Bungie has talked a lot over the years about how they're changing up the Destiny formula, and the reality and the resounding result of that is that every time they're saying they're changing up the formula, yeah, they'll add quality of life stuff and they'll improve some bits and pieces here and there, but the needle doesn't really move. And that's a big conception that needs to be changed. Destiny needs this kind of fresh growth and change as a franchise. It's wrong to say that it's been resting on its laurels, because, there have been ups and downs in this game. If it was consistently great, then I think maybe we would be able to sit there and say that, but that's not the case. However, there is a lot of complacency with regards to stuff that's going on in Destiny from, well, I don't know if it's right to say it's from the developers. If you say from Bungie, that kind of hits everyone with it, but yeah, there's just a general note that some of this stuff works and it doesn't need to be fixed, but not all of it does work perfectly. It's why things like the Portal and approaches to core game rewards and activities, no matter what they are, it's important that these turn from words into actions. So seeing more of the development process as it goes on, yeah, very important for that side of things. Very important for players to understand it. And generally, I think Destiny needs to get to this point where they are more approachable and where we are able to see these updates actively turn into stuff in-game that we'll be able to sit and play. As a general point, I think Bungie's path back from everything here is a long and hard one. It is one that will require consistent effort. They basically need to keep a lid on everything. And if they don't, then, well, it's just more of the bad morale for the community that we've experienced over the last year and a bit. It's just more of the same that has been frustrating to the community ever since Lightfall and since the first and second round of layoffs. The general vibe of Destiny is that it's a game that is dying, and until Bungie changes that with stuff that includes action and shows real success in terms of the numbers of players coming back, until they are able to actively address some of that and show that the game has pep in its step and some life, then I fear it's going to continue on this road. Does that necessarily mean that things are over? No, we've seen successes that bounce back from failures. Look at Into the Light, it's as simple and as recent as a few months ago. But I don't know if that's always going to be the case for players. Lots of Destiny players are just tired of this narrative, and we'd love it to be able to change. Before we end here, I also wanted to just briefly go over my own thoughts about all of this, which is simply, well, I think in the past I would have called it cautious optimism, and there's an aspect to which some of that might still apply, but I think it's more appropriate in this moment for me to sit there and call it a cautious approach. Bungie is saying all the right things, but as I said, just because you're saying the right things doesn't mean it turns into actions. I trust some of the developers within the studio to get that done. In fact, I trust a lot of them to get it done. But I have a fundamental distrust of the management and leadership of the studio at this moment in time. I do not trust Pete Parsons. I do not trust the higher-ups. I am sitting here worried about the future of Destiny as long as they're at the helm, but at very least there is a road now. There is a road that everyone is at least trying to follow. There is a pathway forward for the game that involves the next however many years, and perhaps more importantly than all of that, even though it's something which, you know, may not be followed to the letter, it gives everyone a chance to turn these words into an action over at Bungie. When the words become actions, when we're trying to invigorate things so that it's easier for new players to get into the story, turns into an actual campaign where players can easily understand the story regardless of where their lore knowledge is, when all of that happens, essentially it's going to become a moment where we were able to turn around and say, okay, yes, we believe you. But there need to be a lot of moments like that. Destiny has left itself with a single pathway forward, and that's the long and hard climb back up. We all know who the perpetrators and the ones responsible for that are, and it's a shame, because to a certain extent it feels like some of the hard work that went into the final shape is moot. But I don't think that's entirely the case. You know, we still, despite the layoffs, have a lot of talented devs over there in the Bungie studio, and clearly they still want to go ahead and release content. We're still getting things like new raids and dungeons. We're still getting reasons to jump in and play the story, and they are trying to reinvigorate the approach to storytelling. The new saga and the direction that it gives us is going to be a big part of some of this, because again, we need a reason to play things in Destiny. We need a reason to engage with the story. So if we don't have that, yeah, that's a solid problem. All that being said, I don't want to call it cautious optimism. I'm just looking at this cautiously now. I'm not optimistic until I see those words, as I said, turn into action. When I sit here and see what they're doing with Apollo and what the changes that they're trying to bring to fruition in episodes are, when I see more about what Behemoth looks like and what the major updates are and what they might be doing to improve the new player experience, until I see all of that, I don't want to render a final judgment and say things. What I would say, though, I may not be the only one who is sitting there and looking at this in the community, and the phrase rather, cautious optimism is being thrown around quite a bit, but there's also a lot of people for whom there is no phrase being thrown around because they're done. Those are the players that we also need to keep in mind. Not just current players who are still here hanging on with the game, not just new players who you're trying to entice into playing, but also the old guard. There is an enormous contingent of people who've tried Destiny and at some point have put it down. And it doesn't mean that they all need to come back. Sometimes you put a game down because you're satisfied and you've had a good time with it, and you're just done for the moment. But Destiny is not in that position anymore. There's a lot that's changed. There's a lot that's been screwed up and changed around in the last few years, and ultimately I think that the attrition of things has really hit Destiny really badly. If we're really going to focus on things, I think a real sign of success is not just going to be the integration of those new players, it's also going to be whether the old players who have put down the game because of one thing or another sit there, see something new and say, yeah, I want to give that a try again. I'm going to pick this up one more time. If you manage to get both those groups on board, Destiny flourishes again, I hope. But that's not a guarantee. In fact, again, as I said, long hard path upwards to get there. So we'll see what happens, but for the moment, we have an update, we have a direction, we have a course, we are locked in, and we are going to see more of that direction start to reveal itself with Revenant and with Heresy. Those two episodes that are the prelude and the end of everything to do with the Light and Dark saga and the prelude to Apollo and Frontiers, yeah, all of that is going to be something we'll look on and watch more of the lore of, but yeah, tell me your thoughts. I don't know what the general vibe is. It's cautious optimism over on Twitter for a lot of people, but I'm not totally sure that's the whole story. I think more importantly than anything, if you are one of those players that's lapsed, do you know what gets you back? Do you know what brings you back into the game? This is a feedback thing, and it's not one of those things where you should feel obligated to reply either. This is one of those moments where you got to remember that devs occasionally look at my content. So if there is something that would bring you back, if there's something you enjoyed or you had fun with, this is the moment to talk about it and post it. Because ultimately, yeah, this is the moment where you can affect some change, maybe. I don't know, it's going to be a weird one. Destiny still has a lot of dark times ahead of it before anything potentially gets good, but we'll see what's what. Hopefully more content down the road is a good reason to keep playing. Hopefully there's more stories to be told. From what I can say, at very least, there are people within the studio who are still confident about the future of Destiny. And, hey, that gives me a little confidence. But it's too soon to tell. Words need to turn into actions. Anyway, thank you for listening to my little ramble about this. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave a like, and of course, subscribe. I'll be talking about more universes and more things as we go forward from Destiny and other places. Thank you for the response to the Space Marine 2 video as well. It's nice to see other content on the channel doing okay. Anyway, as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.